Well, hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to 2CTV, and today's first live stream. We're going to have a couple of these live updates for you guys. Let's talk about the latest update from the Middle East, specifically Gaza and Gaza City. Things are still relatively the same in regards to the actual conflict, the counterattack from the Israeli side, but we also have a couple of other updates about the leadership, the Islamist leadership. In this video, we're going to explore the corruption when it comes to the United Nations, the so-called United Nations, and the so-called impartial and professional independent body that is supposed to be helping the world, apparently, but in reality it's not really the same. Certain agencies linked to the UN, including of course the one in Gaza, for years we've heard allegations against them in regards to being anti-Semitic and of course helping the Islamists. But tonight we have an expose. There's a phone call between a resident in Gaza and an IDF agent who they were talking about what happened to the international aid and all the humanitarian aid that's been sent to Gaza, all your tax money from all the countries, and of course everything else has been sent from around the world. Where does it go? How does it get spent? Now, most of you will not be shocked to hear that, of course, corruption will be involved in this, but it's still important to talk about the detail. It's still important for everybody else to know what's happening in case they're just getting their news from the mainstream media. All right, let's start this video. Hello to everybody in the live chat. We'll get your reaction very shortly. First, let's talk about this phone call, recorded call between an IDF officer and a Gazan resident, explaining that, surprise, surprise, it is in fact the Hamas side that are controlling the humanitarian aid services. Let's go to the phone call first.
أنا فاهم إنه الوضع مزري، أنا فاهم إنه الوضع مزري.
الوضع مزري لأنه الناس اللي ماسكة الزبونات، عشان تبقى فاهم، الناس اللي ماسكة المساعدات كمان حرامية.
ليش المساعدات حرامية؟ يعني في هناك عناصر حماس اللي عم ياخذوا من هذا الأكل من المساعدات الإنسانية.
أكيد ما هم وين حماس وين موجودة، وين بتكون موجودة بتخرب.
بس هذا المكان هو للمساعدات الإنسانية، يعني يجب عليهم إعطاء الغذاء إلى المدنيين. شو دخل حماس هناك؟
ما هو حماس يا سيدي العزيز، حماس حاطة ايدها على كل حاجة عشان تبقوا انتم فاهمين. حماس حاطة ايدها على موظفين الوكالة، هم القيادات في رئاسة الوكالة، هم المسؤولين في الجمعيات، هم المسؤولين في هان وهان. من يوم ما مسكوا البلد وهم ماسكين كل حاجة إلها سيطرة على البلد.
يعني ما عم يعطوا المدنيين ولا أي غذاء؟
بيعطوا خصاتهم بالأول.
وانتم يعني جربتم تحكوا مع الوكالة وتقولوا لهم هذا الشيء، يعني ومسؤولين الوكالة
مع مين
مسؤولين
اللي بيحكي
مسؤولين الوكالة كمان عم يتعاملوا مع حماس؟
سيدي موظفين الوكالة هم حماس.
موظفين الوكالة هم حماس؟
هذه حاجة بعيدة عنكم، بس هي أكيد لا، أكيد مش بعيدة عنكم. اللي ماسك يعني رؤساء الأقسام أو القيادات المناصب هذه في الوكالة هم نفسهم من أعضاء حماس.
It's absolutely astonishing, isn't it? Again, as I said, for a lot of us it's not a complete surprise, but it's considering that the corporate media, international media around the world are still portraying the United Nations side as fully credible and accountable and actually pro-humanitarian issues, considering they don't really do anything with Jewish people around the world. They don't really care. They don't seem to care about what's happening to Christians in Nigeria, which happens every Christmas, all the attacks on them. They don't seem to care about any of that. But when it comes to the Middle East, when it comes to the Arab side and all the others, anybody that's against the Western culture, Western civilization, they seem to care so much about helping them. But it goes beyond that phone call that I just showed you as well. It's not just about an anecdote of a story from one resident in Gaza saying that they're all working together. Even though that you could just say, well, that's just an anecdote. We kind of know it's true anyway. But the corruption goes beyond that. The dodgy behavior goes beyond that. And I'm going to show you a reminder of what sort of stuff we've been dealing with. When it comes to the UNRWA, the United Nations agency to help the Palestinians, let's not forget that the former boss of the UNRWA that was recently appointed as the head of Red Cross was actually forced to resign from the UN agency over the internal ethics report that was about reporting the sexual affairs and staff being bullied, and of course a lot of harassment and abuse of power, corruption scandal inside the UN agency. The guy was fired because of that. Well, he was forced to resign, and instead of actually sorting things out, the gravy train moves to another track. So he is now working for Red Cross. Not just working for Red Cross, he is the new chief, the new head of Red Cross. This is what happens. So it's the same as the European Union, for example. It's essentially a place not just as a gravy train, but it's a place for failed elected politicians of various countries. For example, Juncker was one of them. When you fail, or when you basically leave in disgrace, or whatever happens to you, it doesn't matter, because you will get a cushy job, whether it's at the UN or the EU or all the other international institutions. So that's the plan that you usually have. Also, let's not forget, about a month ago, this was reported, one of the hostages that were released said that they were held for nearly 50 days in the attic of an UNRWA teacher and were provided with little food and no medication. Another hostage was also held captive by a Gazan doctor, and all the doctors are also linked to the UN agency. So the schools and the medical centers and the hospitals all work directly with the United Nations, and they are telling us that these people are civilians and they are compassionate and they really care about humans, even though this is the same leadership that have been using people's money to build tunnels for the Islamist leadership, but they have not built one bunker for the actual civilians in Gaza. You see the problem. Yet the mainstream media in the West and the leftist groups and the political parties continue to turn a blind eye, at best, benefit of the doubt, turn a blind eye against the truth. The truth is not being mentioned, as usual. So, let's quickly get your reaction as well about this issue. JB says the United Nations are unelected and then gave themselves immunity from prosecution. Yeah, so this has always been a case, which has also been a little bit dodgy, mostly because there was a reason initially for each country, each independent sovereign country that would have an embassy and a list of diplomats in each country to have the basic immunity for their diplomats, mostly because, of course, the direct relations and agreements, treaties. Why would the United Nations diplomats need that sort of immunity? Why? Is that necessary? What were they thinking in the first place? Were they already thinking that maybe the plan from the beginning was to one day turn the UN into the actual world government? That plan kind of failed. I'm guessing they moved on from that plan to find other avenues to create their own one world government. Was it for them to basically safeguard themselves and their people, because they knew there are times there will be some dodgy characters who will become diplomats for the UN, so they needed protection? Probably that as well. Vlad the Impaler says, astonishing how the left was so easily captured by the Hamas rhetoric. Well, it's, I mean, on a more basic level, on the surface, it's simply because anything that is against the Western civilization and Western values, especially Judeo-Christian values in the West, the radical left will always support that side. That's on the surface, on a very basic level. Now, sometimes it gets deeper. Sometimes there's cooperation between various anti-Western groups, whether it's like the CCP types going hand in hand with the crazy far left side and the Islamists, because then the wider plan is to have one common goal, which is to bring down the whole West as a system, as society, to start from scratch, and then Back in the day, you had to have tanks to cross borders, like in the late 30s and early 40s, to capture countries. Then it became about taking over institutions. That was Stalin's Russia, Soviet Union. Now, there's a new way of doing it. You slowly infiltrate each country and each culture and society by bringing in more people and having more babies than the actual citizens of the country, original citizens. And now, by capturing, by winning the battle of ideas, essentially, unfortunately, for now, schools, generally academia, entertainment, culture, the political establishment, everything being captured by that toxic ideology. Vanilla Kong says, Maya, what do you think of 2024? Hello from Sweden. Well, hello, Sweden. I've actually talked about this quite recently on this channel. 2024 is going to be, well, it's going to be very exciting. It's going to be very volatile. We are going to get some ups and downs from across the world. You're going to get some good news, you're going to get some bad news, but I think generally speaking, it's going to be one of the most important years of this decade, with everything going on, not just in terms of on the democratic side. We got elections coming up, like in the US, France, Macron is getting ready to leave, and all the others as well. But we are also getting to, essentially, it feels like we're getting to some sort of endpoint when it comes to the Ukraine conflict. It seems like by next year, potentially, I'm not making any predictions, potentially, there could actually be some sort of negotiations between the two sides, Russia and Ukraine, some sort of result on how much territory Russia could keep or whatever that's going to happen. The situation in the Middle East is going to escalate up to a point where I can see a situation where Iran will get involved, even though Iran is already involved and nobody seems to care about it. The uprising in Iran continues as well, and that could make a radical change in terms of the image of how the Middle East looks. Because, of course, once they are done with the Islamists in Gaza, we could see a situation with the conflicts escalating in Lebanon with Hezbollah and all the others as well. The Houthis, probably this is the final countdown for those nutters in Yemen. It's going to be so much happening. The World Economic Forum, this year's Davos conference, is apparently going to be very juicy. They are stepping up their game in terms of who they invite and what sort of discussions they have. There's going to be so much happening, which means also 2CTV will be extremely busy. So we're going to be on top of everything. Right, let's go to Pete. 2024 is going to be, shall we say, hairy. It will not take much to trigger things globally. That's actually a good way of saying it as well. Everything's on edge, essentially. Christopher says, the left are easily captured on everything. They are weak, but there will be one day when they will be shouting out for help from people like us. But I say, let them live with their stupidity. This is actually a good assessment as well. I would currently say that about the liberals rather than the left. Of course, there's a massive difference between the left and the liberals. The liberals are the ones, in the name of progressive agenda and everything else, they were the ones who kept promoting mass migration, multiculturalism, just be friends with everybody and they're not going to harm you. They are already slowly coming out to shout out for help, saying, oh, we are so shocked with this level of anti-Semitism. Oh, what's going to happen? What's happening in our schools? We got Muslim families coming out against LGBT lessons and everything else. Like, now you want our help. Now you know what you've done. Now you don't know how to stop it. So right now we're already seeing it from some liberal leftists. But then when it comes to the actual socialist left, that's going to take a while. At the end, the worst case scenario, which will be more tensions and conflicts across the world, especially the developed democratic world, if, obviously, God forbid, worst case scenario, there's going to be some sort of fallout in some of our countries, and that's when you're going to get the left eating itself. So it will be, for example, the radical left and the Islamist side then at each other's throats because they say, well, I now have to be in charge. No, I have to be in charge. Again, that's an exaggerated scenario, which hopefully will not happen, but you can't be complacent about where this world is going. Glinsayer says, we, the people, have got to make the government deport all of the invaders by whatever means. So there are some positive updates coming from the unlikely places, which we've been reporting and discussing over the last couple of months. One was, for example, in France, even Germany at times, and now the Netherlands, they're talking about mass deportations and a very specific policy of mass deportations. It's not just illegal migrants, it's not just foreign criminals, it's also those who are supporting jihad and jihadists. Those countries are already having conversations, and of course the French government and French parliament managed to pass the kind of consensus in terms of their new policy direction to do that. That's good, because while in this country, the United Kingdom, we seem to not have any optimism currently from any of the mainstream parties. Doesn't seem to be anybody proposing anything even moderate to what we want. But I think it's still okay, because if the liberal and leftist countries like France and others, if they end up doing it, and many others as well, then we will be forced to do it. Even our political establishment, even Keir Starmer as Prime Minister potentially, relatively speaking, will be forced to do some of it, even if it means just deporting foreign criminals. It's so sad that for us, even that's like a small victory. Like, yeah, well, we'll take it. But obviously, ideally, we want to push for parties and political leaders that could actually win elections based on radical manifestos and agendas. It's just that how do you sell that to the British public? The British public will be still, a lot of them, not the people watching this right now, a lot of them seem to be burying their heads in the sand. But the issue is, when it gets too late, when the time comes, then how are you going to stop the anger of the Anglo-Saxons and the Brits in general? Narnian Railway says, using pro-Palestine words, the migrants in the West, in Western nations, are colonists and should be expelled immediately. It is interesting how they always... so even right now, with white Europeans who are basically in their own countries, they would just go around, live their lives in their own towns, and they would get called by the far left or some of the newcomers. They are still called colonists. It's still happening. So there are literally young white people in their 30s or 40s or 50s or whatever who were not born back in the day when there were empires, and they still get called colonists. So at this point, it's ironic that the people who are basically becoming the majority slowly in terms of the certain cultures and certain races, they're still calling the white Europeans who haven't really left their countries the colonists. At this point, they are the colonists. Well, they are the invaders. So, but the colonist part of it has not happened yet, because there's a very specific definition of the word. But in terms of the invasion, it's definitely happening. I am LGB, and I am so angry at the buffoonery of my community. Why do we act like Islam is our friend when it goes against our whole existence? Which is absolutely fascinating. I agree. It's the same thing with only a couple of decades ago. We could say the same about feminist groups. 10 years ago, when feminist groups, left-wing feminist groups, who were coming out to say, oh yes, multiculturalism, diversity and everything else, without thinking who they're talking about. Then they kept hearing all these grooming gangs and everything else. I'm like, yeah. They were setting up Sharia courts in the UK in certain small towns and villages to do forced marriages. And then feminists were like, oh, what's happening here? Same thing is now happening with the LGBT community overall. So there are a lot of sensible people who just happen to be part of the LGBT community. They're just there as individuals, as people. They are just gay. And they're trying not to be associated with the rest of the LGBT plus Q, whatever, movement anymore, because it doesn't seem to be sensible anymore. They seem to be shooting themselves in the foot. And they are doing a disservice to actual gay people or lesbians. And this is the whole problem. One issue is the whole gender lobby. That's one thing. But the fact that they are going to the anti-Israel protests, flying the flag of Palestine with rainbow next to it. And every time they do that, you actually get the pro-Palestinian side having a fight with them in the middle of a street during their own anti-Israel march, saying, we don't want you here. Well, why did you go? Did you really think they're going to like you? Did you really think somehow the Palestinian side are now pro-LGBT? So stupid. Absolutely stupid. Anyway. Cami says, Islam will rise because of lax immigration and special treatment. Not people not breeding constantly. Don't put that on people. You shouldn't have kids to fulfill your idea of saving the white race. So nothing to do with the white race. So the last part of this comment is incorrect. So there's been a lot of people talking about this, from Jordan Peterson to Elon Musk and many others as well, on the more conservative side and even the libertarian side, saying what I've been saying, that it's just been the inevitable outcome that certain, obviously, the Islamic community, they seem to have more babies. And of course, they also have a lot of forced marriages. And the solution, well, the criticism is not really us. We're not criticizing the white Europeans for not having babies. We're just explaining that that's because of that. Because a lot of the more middle class people in the West, as people become more middle class and more prosperous, generally speaking, especially the younger generation, and become more liberal, they don't really get married as much. Even if they get married, divorces are going higher than before, the rate of divorce. They're not really having babies because, again, even the wife, they are choosing careers. Again, it's freedom, do whatever you want. They are choosing careers that will basically stop that. And there's a lot of other issues as well. It's not us putting it on people. It's not us saying, come on, it's your fault, have babies. It's not your fault you didn't have a baby. No. It's the fact that we're just saying that's why it's happening. And, Islam will rise because of mass migration. Even if you stop immigration right now, just ban it, stop the whole thing and special treatments, it will still happen, because there are already enough people from the Islamic community who will already do more breeding and have more babies. And there will be more of them. And it's nothing to do with saving the white race. It's not about the race. It's about values. It's about the culture. It's about believing in the Western civilization. It's about believing in Judeo-Christian values, even if you're not a Christian. There are some atheists who still believe in the values. And that's the whole point. Nothing to do with fulfilling the idea of saving the white race. This is the issue. So yeah, don't fall for that trap. But I do get what you mean, obviously, generally speaking. Thank you for your comment. Let's go to RG. Thank you very much, RG, one of our regulars, I believe from Israel, saying a new report from the Arab media claims that Sinwar will agree to a deal mediated by Qatar and Egypt, the actual criminals, their prisoners, and a 20-day ceasefire in exchange for about 40 of the kidnapped civilians. So about, what is it now? It's 6:22 p.m. UK time. Let me just get my timing right. At 8 p.m. UK time. So about an hour and a half. We're going to come back because we're going to be talking about that. We're going to give you the update on what's going on in Cairo. Some stuff is happening in Egypt. We're going to give you the latest update about the Hamas leadership. Where are they? What are they up to? Of course, we'll cover all that at 8 p.m. UK time. Let's go get a couple of more comments before we leave you guys be. Go get your dinners and teas and everything else. Lone Star. See? Lone Star gets what I mean, saying, I am an atheist and still believe in Judeo-Christian values. Exactly. So the thing is, the whole point is, there's a time and place for theological debates and ideological debates about whether you believe in the established religions or not. And we're not including Islam into that because it's a political ideology. And right now, because we are talking about the threat to our values, it's important to remember whether you are an agnostic or atheist or anti-atheist or a Church of England or Catholic or whatever you are, or Jewish, you have to accept that everything that we have in the Western world, obviously combined with a lot of other events that happened, including the Industrial Revolution, including the discoveries and inventions and everything else, but the family values, discipline, order, law and order, respecting justice, all the rest of it comes from initially the ancient empires that obviously sent their values mostly to the West, initially the Greeks, then the Romans, and then obviously this way. And then it was, whether you like it or not, the Judeo-Christian values. It was that. You know, whether you believe it's man-made or it's actually higher power, God did it. At this point, we're not talking about that debate. The values have created this, so be a defender. And afterwards, we're going to have a debate in terms of the higher power and everything else. Anyway. Pele saying, I don't think the UK can actually do anything other than deport anyone practicing Islam and prevent migration for 10, 20 years, allowing a new generation to grow without it. That won't happen. Simply, I mean, if there was a way, and it's easy to say, by the way, if there was a way to ask people, some sort of survey, it's not going to be easy to do. And all these, especially younger Islamist people who are walking around our street, just ask them a couple of key questions. And if they answer in a certain way, you should be out. And by the way, that applies to anybody. I'll be making a joke saying, even if you're a ginger from Wales, I will still deport you. Nothing against the gingers from Wales, but that's just the exaggerated example saying it's not really about the skin color for me. It's about the fact that if you ask questions, asking them, do you believe in jihad, or do you believe in spreading the ideology of Islam? Are you against the values of our civilization in the country you're living? Any of those answers that goes yes against the Western values, you should be out. Don't care about your skin color, you will be out. But again, how are you going to conduct that sort of survey or question? So it's going to be difficult. Unless basically some of them are very open about it. They post on social media, they go on the streets, they do selfie videos, they put on TikTok or whatever, they make speeches. Some of them are easy to identify. You just have to put the actual policy in place. It's very radical. Now you're going to get called xenophobic and nationalist. It doesn't matter. It's national security. It's not prejudice against people with the skin color or different views. That's the issue. Anyway, but also we have to go back to respecting democracy as well. You have to go with the will of the people. So you have to prepare the public first. You can't really have people just deciding on behalf of everybody else, which is the difficult part. You have to win the battle of ideas first. Anyway, thank you very much for joining the first live show. We're going to come back at 8 p.m. UK time, an hour and a half. We're going to give you the updates about what's going on in Cairo with the Islamists, the leaders, Amaya Tusi, and we are the media.